Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of Carefulist the podcast. We are so happy to have Lance O. Slatton with us from All Home Care Matters. Welcome, Lance.
Thank you, Katie. It's a pleasure to be here.
I am so glad that we have this chance to chat because you have so much experience in and around this industry. So we thought we could just start by learning what your personal caregiving story is.
Yeah, well, for me, it's kind of a two-part story. And what I mean by that, when I was younger, my mother was and is a nurse, and actually the doctor that delivered me just retired just like a couple years ago. He was well into his 90s. He was a what you would call a country doctor. And it always just fascinated me. So I always knew I wanted to go into healthcare and I wanted to be a doctor. And, fast forward as I get older, my grandmother was diagnosed with dementia. She came to live with my mom and sister and I when I was still living at home. No one knew she had dementia, like most families. We would call, check in on her, sounded great during the day. Then I have family that still live down south by her. And then she started calling 911 because after my grandfather died, she lived alone in a very big house. And she started calling 911 in the early hours of the morning. We're talking like 1, 2, 3 a.m.
Mhm.
And she was convinced that there were people in the house having big parties in the other side of the house and all this stuff. And so what culminated in the police finally notifying my uncle and then my uncle
Mhm.
notifying my mom. And I drove down and picked her up because the police said, look, if we have to come back another time, we're going to have to intervene and take action. And thankfully, in a lot of ways, that was a blessing because she lived in a very small country town down south and where everybody knows everybody. And,
Yeah,
you know, um, they actually have a little more personal connection to people. And I think most places in the country probably would have taken her into the emergency room on a psych evaluation, and it could have been a lot different outcome. And so we picked her up, and she thrived and did well with us for several years. And she had that stimulation, she had that engagement,
yeah,
and I got a firsthand experience at a very young age of what people going through dementia are dealing with and what families deal with, where my peers at the time, none of them could imagine, what that was
right.
like, knew what that was like.
Yeah,
And so that gave me a very real world firsthand account. And, that just furthered motivated my desire to go to medical school. Few years go by and I'm actually in college and pursuing medical school. I was very heavily involved in the thick of it, and then I was a newlywed and my wife and I got a phone call one evening that my father needed to either come stay with us for a few weeks or he would have to go into a facility to recover from his surgery. And doing what I think most families would do if they're in a position of being able to, we had him obviously come live with us. We quickly discovered he needed 24/7 care, and that couple of
wow.
weeks turned into seven more major surgeries. And we were providing 24/7 care. And my wife was a great asset and a great support, but she'd already graduated. She had, got her degree. I'm still pursuing a higher level degree.
Mhm.
I wasn't in a position where I was able to just, put in, FMLA or take time off or whatever.
Right.
And, college doesn't wait for you, no matter what your situation is, good, bad, or
No, they
otherwise.
don't.
And I could never understand, like, what are people doing? We're kind of in a unique situation. We're younger. We don't have children. I'm able to kind of pop home now and again and help. And, you know, um, that 2.5 years, we never got any resources, never got any information, no connections. No one really even truthfully asked us, how are you doing? Is there anything we can do for you? And so I actually went to have lunch with a really good friend of mine, already done with college. He has his own practice. And in the hallway of his office building, there was a home healthcare company saying now hiring, immediate start, immediate openings, all this stuff. Well, in preparation of medical school, I did an EMT course, I did a paramedic course. Now, I was student teaching at the university and I was working in the labs. Great jobs. I love them. But anybody listening or watching this, or maybe even you, Katie, knows when you're working for the university, you don't really get paid by the university. It's literally minimum wage. And every
Yeah.
semester we would get literally a nickel raise, which is really hard to sustain yourself when you're on your own. You have a mortgage, you're married. and we did not have kids at the time, it's just not sustainable. It's very, very
Right.
taxing, and it's a lot for the other spouse who might be the breadwinner at the time to then have to kind of dual support. But we knew what we were getting into. We had discussions. That was never an issue at all. But at the same time, I'm like, man, what am I going to do with my dad? And, because now I'm not working as much at the school. And so I stopped in this home healthcare place because I'm like, well, I worked in cardiac critical care in one of our local hospitals. I'm
Mhm.
qualified. Maybe I could get a job doing this and sounds interesting. I went in there. The person knew nothing, and I mean nothing about what jobs they are hiring for, what the qualifications or the requirements were. And I'm like, but you're the person sitting here at the desk where it says, now hiring.
Right.
I literally left that place, no exaggeration. I called my wife and I'm like, I have a brilliant idea. We should start a company where we send people into the homes to help them with things like what we're going through with my dad. Not realizing, now this is a long time ago, not realizing there's all these companies out. I mean, this was really before Instagram became popular, Twitter. We're talking 2009, 10, right around there, maybe.
Mhm.
So it's quite a while ago. And, social media was just getting a little popular, but Instagram wasn't even owned by Meta at the time. I don't even know if Twitter existed. Um, so like this wonderful, community that we're all a part of online in these social circles, it wasn't existing at the time. And
Right.
nobody knew, oh, there's all these home care companies and this and that. I literally just thought I invented something and I was like pretty sure it would be successful. Well, then doing research, you find out there's a multi-billion dollar industry out there called home care. And so we started talking to some franchises, all great people. But the one thing that couldn't satisfy me and my questions was simply, what separates this franchise from that franchise and that franchise? So if I say
Mm.
McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, Big Mac, Whopper, Dave's Deluxe. If I
Right.
say franchise A, franchise B, franchise C, you have no idea what the difference is. They don't have a Whopper or a Big Mac or a Dave's Deluxe. And so, I have a healthcare background, pretty extensive. My wife has a very vast business background. And we said, well, I was going to go on a weekend trip to one of these, they call them retreats, because I kind of narrowed it down to one that I really kind of felt connected to. But then I couldn't get past what is the difference? Like, and none of
Mhm.
them could give me an answer that really satisfied me. It was
Yeah.
always, well, our owner or our this. So all the franchises, they all started with an owner that had a passion for helping people.
Mhm.
And now all the franchises are owned, hopefully, by others that have passions to help people. But I know from firsthand experience of having our own company now for close to 15 years, not all franchise owners feel that way. Sometimes it's just a business investment,
Right.
just like, the nursing home my father was at, most nursing homes in the country, they're not owned per se by people that really want to just help. They're owned by investment groups. They're owned by a group of physicians that, go in and, they're trying to earn extra income and hopefully
Mhm.
they're all doing a great job. But we all know that a lot of nursing homes, the care and the customer service is very subpar.
Right.
Um, I just had a very close family member who spent 5 weeks in the nursing home, and the stories I could tell you, I mean, my hair would grow. They're so crazy, but that's the sad reality of what our country deals with. We've put, almost profits before people and the care comes secondary and they're not all like that. Don't misunderstand me, but the majority of people, that's what their experience is.
Yep.
So we decided to start our own company, and that's been a great blessing because I feel like we wouldn't be in a position we're in today had we went a quote unquote easy route and went with a franchise and had everything just handed to us, so to speak. We
Mhm.
had to learn a lot of stuff on our own. And one of the biggest attractions for me for doing our own company, which, the statistics are just astronomical for people that start their own, they don't last,
Yeah.
um, is the fact we can kind of put our own principles in place. We could put our own policies in place. But really, one of the biggest things for me was we can also serve anybody anywhere. One of the things that I just wasn't really keen on with franchises was the fact you're getting a territory and you have to
Right.
stay within that territory. And now, granted, you can buy additional territories and expand your territory, but what if your aunt needed our help and she's just outside the boundaries of our territory and you only want us, but there's another franchise of the same company, same corporate franchise in her territory, they have to agree to allow us to serve her. And I'm
Hmm.
sure they would have no problem with it, but why go through all that red tape? It should be if they
Yeah.
want us, they should be able to take us. But that's not the model, and I appreciate that. So for us, we started our own. But to go back to your original question, when I got on this kick of, leaving my buddies from having lunch that day and leaving that office building, and I had that idea, like I mean, it wasn't just a snap of the fingers and I quit that pursuit, but I just said,
Hmm.
my whole goal, right? And it's so cliche, but it really is so true. And I spent months and months on this question because I knew I was going to be asked it for the admission process for med school. Why do you want to be a doctor? And it really boiled down to because I want to help people. Well,
Yep.
everybody and our poor applicants at our company, I always ask them, why do you want to be a CNA? Why do you want to be a home health aide? Why do you want to be a caregiver? Because I want to help people. So I give that back to them. I said, okay, that's great. And that's what we want. I said, but so did the lady or the man that just left an hour before you in their interview. What makes you different than them? They want to help
Mhm.
people also, because I want to get a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah.
So, my thing was that's why I wanted to be a doctor. And with, taking this big leap of faith because it wasn't an easy decision, I wanted to help. I feel like in my position, I've been able to help people in a different way, but in just as an impactful, positive way as if I did continue that pursuit of medical school, because
Hmm.
I'm helping people in their living rooms, you know, people at my church, people that I'll never even like quote unquote do business with in a transactional way. I'm still helping them in a supportive way by saying, hey, look, you don't have to pay for that hospital bed. You can go and ask your doctor for an order in Medicare DMEs as long as they haven't already had one, they'll help cover that bed for you. And that's a true story. When we first started the first year, wonderful man. He was, we're in Michigan, so Detroit's Motor City, home of the UAW. We were invited by a good friend of mine. She was the secretary to the president of the UAW, which is a big, big position, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of like being the press secretary for the president.
Right.
uh, she was she invited us to give a speaking engagement to all of their retirees, and this is a huge complex. I mean, there's probably over 1,000 people there. So we did a presentation educating them on what home health care is versus home care, because as you know, they're totally different fields, totally
Yes.
different everything. But most average people to this day still don't realize that.
No, they don't.
So after the speak, this gentleman came up and wonderful man. He said, I really need to meet with you guys. I have a lot of questions. We said, sure. There's never a cost associated or any obligation. We meet with families all the time. We never end up helping them in the sense of sending our staff in there. And that's the
Mhm.
only time there's an actual economic cost to them. Any other thing
Mhm.
we'll do on our own time, our own budget, our own money. And he said, look, my mom's 98 years old. She lives in one of these big, beautiful, historical, homes in downtown Detroit.
Yeah.
Just gorgeous. He said, my sister and I, we were raised there. My mother and father have bought this as soon as they got married. And I mean, this place just will take your breath away. We met him there one night and he's asking us all these questions, we're graciously as much time as you need, you know. And he said, and this other thing that's really bugging me, and he pulls out his wallet and he takes a check out of his wallet for $5,000. And he says, this is a lot of money for my mom. She didn't really work. She didn't have a pension. My dad was the breadwinner, and she just gets
Yeah.
a small, social security check every month. But in order for her to come home, the nursing home said, we have to purchase a hospital bed.
Mm.
And just conveniently enough, they have a medical supply and equipment company associated, all within the same building.
Mm. Of
And we're like,
course.
well, why do you have to buy it? Just get an order from the doctor. And now he's looking at us very skeptically. And I
Hmm.
understand that. I didn't hold that against him. Here the doctors and social workers are telling him at this facility, this is what you got to do. And here he just met us for a half an hour, 45-minute lecture at the UAW
Hmm.
hall. And I said, look, it's fine. I said, but just all you got to do is make a phone call to your doctor, ask your mother's doctor. Don't ask the facility, ask your mother's doctor if he could give you an order for a hospital bed. I said, I'm telling, and our registered nurse was with us too, and she's supporting everything I'm telling him.
Mhm.
He said, well, all right. He says, because I have to do this tomorrow. This was Thursday night. He had to go back there Friday so mom could come home because they
Mhm.
promised dad, when dad passed away, that we will take care of mom and mom will be able to pass in the home like their father did.
Yes.
And so the next day, I don't know what time he called or whatever, but I gave him my cell phone number. And I don't usually do that with families just because it
Mhm.
gets kind of messy.
Yeah.
And but this was in the early days, so I had no problem. And I missed a call because I was in an appointment or something. This grown man, 60 something years old, crying his eyes out, thanking us so
Oh,
very much for that advice. And he was so disappointed and hurt that this place he had entrusted with his mother and her care and her discharge
mhm.
would so willingly just take $5,000 from them for something that he didn't have to pay for.
Right.
And he's like, I'm going to tell everybody, you guys are the real deal. You're not just here to try, because these guys, UAW, whatever you want to call it, they always get hit up and buy this, buy that. We're not selling anything. We're educating people. And if we
Right.
can help you, we will help you. But if we can't, we're not going to hurt you either. And
Yeah.
we got no dog in this hunt, as they say. We're just trying to give you information to save that money for
Hmm.
your mom because him and his sister, they were both newly retirees from the UAW. They were going to take turns taking care of mom. And that $5,000 might go a long way for buying, maybe they need Boost or Insure or briefs or,
Right.
maybe the new cane or, whatever it may be. And he's just like, I could never thank you enough for you guys. You guys you didn't make any money on this. You didn't sell anything. You came on your own time. You spent that time with us. And he's like, that's so refreshing because he's like, that's not how it usually goes. And I said, well,
Right.
that's because we just want to help people. So to answer your question, that's long story for your short answer of how I got involved. It started with my grandmother and my mom being a nurse for the doctor, and it just transitioned into, helping my father and then just diverting into, what, I feel like I can have as an impactful help for people doing this than,
Mhm.
having that 15 minutes in that doctor's room, to check you out.
Right. Well, and you've touched on some really important things. We've gotten so far away from where healthcare should be, right? It has turned into this business model, and that's why people like you and I exist,
Right.
because we are pushing back against the business model and trying to remind people that this is a people-centered, people-focused service. And so I am so glad that you do what you do. And for everyone listening, there are people like Lance and his organization out there who are here to serve you, not here to fleece you
Right.
or charge you more than is reasonable.
Yeah, absolutely. And Katie, me personally, we're strong in our faith and our family, very involved with our church and things. And, but even if people aren't, I don't judge people by that. Everybody, it's a personal choice. But one thing I think that could apply to everybody, regardless if you are faith or not faith or unsure of your faith, there's a quote in the Bible that I personally live by. And Robert F. Kennedy had said this once on the campaign trail, and it's actually a biblical quote, not an RFK quote, but a lot of times it gets attributed to him. But it's to whom much is given, much will be required. And I've
Yes.
been very fortunate in my life. Had a phenomenal childhood, very privileged, and, I just feel like, when you bless others, it comes back to bless you. When you help others, it comes back. And I really feel like, isn't that kind of the whole point of, life anyways, is to try to help others when you're able to. Um, and I also, another thing, a good friend of mine, he's a salesperson. He said, you never want to specialize in a one-time customer. That's not how a business grows.
Right.
You know, you might you might be able to take advantage of that person and maybe triple charge them for something and they don't know what they don't know. So they don't know it's being triple charged, but they're going to find out at some point, right?
Mhm.
And when they find that out, do you think they're ever going to do business with you again? No. And do you
And
think
they're
they're
also
gonna
going to tell other people not to do business
and
with you.
that's I was and do you think they're going to keep that to themselves? No, they're going to.
Right.
Bad news spreads so much faster and quicker than good news, and it's a lot
Mhm.
easier to tear down a reputation than it is to build a reputation.
Yes.
And that's just been our mindset from day one. Treat people right,
Mhm.
be honest with them. We tell people all the time, if we can't help you, we're not going to hurt you.
Yeah.
If you come to us and say, my dad needs help, do you think you can provide care for him? And if this is a person that has no business remaining in the home, that they need institutionalized care, your nursing homes, rehab centers, we're going to be honest and tell you that. But if we
Mhm.
don't think they need it, we're also going to be honest and tell you that too. I see
Right.
more families going into assisted living than not. And I tell them all the time, like, I hate saying it because I'm the home care guy, right? So, of course,
Mhm.
I don't want you, but the truth is, most of them that go in there, they end up calling us and hiring us anyhow because they get that bad information and they get that bad sales pitch and they're misled where they think, oh, mom's going to be, oh, this is so great. It's so much better than the nursing home. First and foremost, nursing homes and assisted living, they shouldn't even be compared. They're two different things altogether.
Yes.
I'm not
Right.
going to compare a horse to a cow, right? They're
Yeah.
both on four legs, but it doesn't mean they're the same thing or they're even close.
For the audience, can you explain the difference between nursing home and assisted care?
Yeah, so assisted living, it's not a one direct clear-cut answer because all of them
Mhm.
offer different things. Some have a level up unit where usually when you go in, you're on a probationary period, right? Usually it's 90 days, but again, that is the typical, it's not necessarily applies to all of them. After that probationary period, they're going to say, yeah, mom is a good candidate. She's a good fit. She can stay in the assisted living wing. If they have a step up unit, that's usually a memory care wing. They might say, well, mom wanders too much. She's too combative. She's going to disrupt our other residents. We
Mhm.
really need to advance her to the next level. And oftentimes they know that before the probationary period or even in the initial conversation, but that's their way of just getting you in there, taking
Yeah.
all the time, moving your stuff in, and then they'll break you the news, down the road. We have a family we've helped for years. This poor man, a lot of it's his own fault. He's literally moved his mother four different times. And every time he goes to a new facility, we're at the point where we're just like, well, it's gonna, oh no, this one's different. They told me this, they told me that. And then within a couple of weeks, he's mad at him and I'm moving mom out and he never sold her little condo so he can just take her back there. But we're like, do you realize the impact this is having on your mother though?
Yeah.
She's already an elderly, frail woman with dementia. This is not good for
She
her.
needs continuity.
She
Yeah.
needs that continuity. And it's like the assisted livings are not it, but when
Yeah.
she's there, he kept our staff going with her. And it's like, but if you're
Hmm.
going to do that, just keep her in the home. You just keep
Yes.
her in the home. I had a family tell me once after learning that the very, very hard way, they said, really, if you can be in assisted living, you can definitely still be in your home. Assisted living, usually, sometimes it's a la carte or as packages. You can say I'm signing up for hygiene care, meals. Sometimes it's one meal is included in your rent or none, or you got to pay for the additional meals, and then your medication. And like for
Hmm.
hygiene care, a lot of people like to take their shower or bath when they're ready to. But with assisted living, it's very regimented. They'll say,
Hmm.
8 to 10, this hallway gets their shower. And if you're not ready, you might miss it that day. Or if you
Hmm.
are ready, you only get a few minutes. You're not gonna get to sit and, relax or soak or,
Hmm.
it's like, all right, I got to get to my next room. Let's get out now. It's really under their rules and their guidelines. And
Yeah.
with nursing home, that's more institutionalized in the medical sense. So let's say somebody goes in for hip replacement. Now, nowadays, sometimes they'll send you home even. But
Hmm.
let's say the doctor says, well, we're going to have you go to rehab for a couple of weeks just to build up that strength, help with your
Hmm.
balancing, get some occupational therapy. Well, as long as you've been in the hospital for 72 hours, that's the golden rule. You have to be admitted for 72 hours. Medicare will cover the first 21 days in the nursing home. Now, here's where the crux lies. What if you need help past 21 days? Well,
Yeah.
if you're fortunate and you have a good supplement and I always tell people, check your insurances, check your coverages, because it's not a one size fits all. Just like everybody's auto insurance has different coverages and different
Right.
things, you will usually be able to stay up to 100 days if your
Mhm.
supplement provides for that. If
Mhm.
it doesn't, then you have really a couple of options. They're going to say, okay, well, then you're going to need to pay copay for every day.
Mhm.
That copay could be $300 to $500. And if you can't afford that, okay, well, then we need to move you out. Or then they'll start talking about enrolling you into your state's Medicaid.
Mhm.
And I always strongly advise talk to your elder law attorney because Medicaid is a state by state basis. It's not a one size fits all. So, you know, if you're in, Missouri, it's going to be different than Michigan. If you're in Michigan, it's going to be different than Florida. There's going to be a lot of crossover, a lot of similarities. But what really starts to have the most impact is the reimbursements and the different impacts. And, like I'll get, for example, I'll just use my father's experience. My father had a very, very robust retirement pension, very
Mhm.
robust. And now he was a federal employee. And so his Medicare wasn't like really existent. It didn't really exist like you and I if we have Medicare, because federal employees, their Medicare is non-existent essentially. They took his entire pension every month because he had to, even with this great pension, he couldn't afford the out-of-pocket copay.
Yeah.
So he had to get enrolled into Medicaid. And
Mhm.
in Michigan, his Medicaid basically took his entire pension, took like 99% of it. He was left with $60 a month to live on. Now, I can't take my family of five to McDonald's for $60.
No.
So it was, but there was no alternative because in my father's situation, assisted living is definitely not even in the realm of possibility. Home care could have possibly worked, but again, then you get into the finances. He required IV antibiotic therapy, intravenous IVs for antibiotics because this wound he had never healed properly and it actually
Mhm.
got into his bones. It was just very, very, very unpleasant. I'll spare everybody the details, but
Mhm.
because of that, it wasn't safe or really even appropriate to keep him at the home any longer. Otherwise, we would have, no question, because we'd already done it
Yeah.
for 2.5 years and we adjusted and, we had a routine down. So that's a nursing home example.
Right.
Nobody in that situation would be even accepted in assisted living. And some
Mhm.
home care companies might accept them, but then you're getting into now you're paying for registered nurses and the IVs and all the different stuff. It just, the safest place for him was in a nursing home. It was the
Yeah.
least ideal of the choices, but it was really the only choice.
Right. So for your home care company,
Yeah.
so this is yet a third option, right? You have assisted living, you have nursing home. For a home care company, what are the types of services that you offer that people should expect from a
Well,
home care
so
service?
it depends on the home care company. It depends on the state.
Okay.
So us being in Michigan, something that we're very big proponents of is state licensing.
Mhm.
Michigan, there is no licensing. I have to have, yeah, there's no licensing. Katie,
Cool.
you could have a sister who is a bookkeeper, never even heard of what a blood pressure is, let alone how to take one. In Michigan, I could hire her and send her into a home. Nobody can say a word about it. Doesn't mean we should, though. Doesn't mean
Right.
we should, nor do we. We
Hmm.
function, our company was built on a state licensing model because we had good friends in Illinois and we learned a lot from them. And we follow as much of that as we can. I mean, there's some things that we can't do because the state doesn't make that available, but we do complete screenings, background checks, motor vehicle checks through the state Secretary of State. Our minimum requirement is 2 years of experience. Um, things like that. But I know so many families over the last 14, almost 15 years, their their families didn't know that, and nor should they. And they
Yeah.
hired what, they would go to their local grocery store and see a tear off on the bulletin board, you know, providing care for your loved one, and tear off, and they think that's a company. And just like
Mhm.
I say to people, I don't go into my doctor. assuming he's not licensed. I go in there, well, he's open, he's practicing. He must
Right.
have all of these things. Otherwise, there's no way he would be in operation.
Yeah.
That's the same way people look at home care. And
Yeah.
when you tell them, like, that plumber has to be licensed to come in my home to fix a leak, but
Mhm.
that home health aide or that CNA doesn't have to be licensed through that company in order to make sure your mom's getting her pain pills at the appropriate time and knows
Right.
to identify a stroke or a heart attack. I mean, it's mind-boggling,
I
but
have to
again,
keep reminding myself to close my mouth because
right.
I'm
Yeah.
in shock. I had no
It's
idea.
it's it's unbelievable. It's
Yeah.
absolutely unbelievable. There's a few states like that. We
Hmm.
had actually had the president of the big lobbying firm and association in Washington, D.C., the Home Care Association of America. We had the president on a while back, and we were talking about like the impact of COVID on home care
Hmm.
and this and that, and then the conversation turned to licensing and she's like, we would love to see that be uniform across the country. The problem is the states like Michigan, you have a lot of companies that have been operating for years, and now you're going to tell them, okay, now you're going to have to be licensed, and that just means you're going to have more paperwork to do, more regulations to do, more, red tape. I said I would be fine with that because I'm thinking about these people who go into that grocery store or even gas stations
Right.
and they tear that off and they think this lady is insured. They have workman's comp, taxes, liability, all these things that they don't have because they can't afford to pay for it because it's usually one person by themselves or maybe one person and a couple of friends and they call themselves
Hmm.
a company and they're not a company.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to go back to answer your
Wow.
question, we provide help for everything up to requiring a nurse. Now,
Okay.
when I mean nurse, like an LPN or an RN, and that usually ends up being, things like needing an IV, blood draws, things that you have to have a quote unquote some type of nurse's license, medical license to do.
Right. Like an
So
invasive type of
more
a
invasive,
procedure.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Like we can help with feeding tubes, we can
Hmm.
check, make sure, if you're diabetic, help read your glucose, your sugar check. But when it gets into, requiring a nurse's license or a medical license, if they're at that point, they really probably should be in a nursing home.
Hmm.
But if it's something maybe like once a week, then you can either hire a home care company to help with all the other stuff. And then maybe that once a week, you get a traveling nurse to come by, pay a
Yeah.
small fee to take care of it. We've seen that as well. Um, and then I've also seen families who literally have hired 24 hours, 7 day a week RNs. And
Hmm.
you can only imagine the expense there. It's astronomical.
Yeah.
Um, but they're in a position they can do that and they don't want to be in a nursing home. And I don't know,
Hmm.
statistically, the AARP had something out not too long ago. I did a thing on it where it was like 94% of all people over the age of 60 that were interviewed said they want to remain in their home until it is not
Yes.
possible any longer. My question is, who's the 6% that doesn't, though? Like
Yeah.
I I just thought that I would figure that's 100%. I would figure that's universal. But,
Right.
maybe you ask them at the wrong time, or maybe they have a massive house with, the upkeep, all that. There could be a number of reasons.
That's what
But
I was thinking. Folks who are tired of the upkeep and
right.
they don't want that anymore. Yeah, that would make sense.
Yeah, but we help people from literally essentially birth all the way through to their end days of elderly years, and everything in the middle. I mean, we've had people who were in a traumatic car accident and they suffered a brain injury and they're, 40 years old.
Yeah.
Um, Situations where a woman and her husband just built their dream house and they're in their 30s and she gets diagnosed with a very rare aggressive form of breast cancer. Um, that's a position where, the husband, he can't stop working. They're already losing
Right.
her income and they're
Yeah.
not going to go on the Medicaid because then it really would be a problem. Like there's a lot,
Yeah.
you just never know, and that's why I
Right.
always recommend to people, you don't know when something can happen. Get your stuff in order,
Yes.
get a will, get your advance directives. It's never too early. I mean, the first time I literally was exposed to advance directives was in college. I was having to take a course on hospice, and one of the assignments was we had to fill out 5 wishes. And now, granted, I was a little younger, a little more brazen, a little more maybe naive. I'm like, why do we have to do this? We're 20 years old, and
Mhm.
but now I can see the point,
Yeah,
because any one of us could have gotten in a bad accident leaving campus or, any
right.
number of things. And our parents probably didn't know what we wanted. We didn't talk about that stuff with mom and dad.
No.
There's all kinds of reasons. So it's never too early, but it can be too late. And
Yes.
it's not something any of us want to think about or really, kind of put in the center of our day. But, it might be the best decision you ever do because, again, you
Mhm.
just never know.
Yeah. And when you're in a tough situation like that, the last thing you want to do is guess. It is so much more comforting.
Yeah.
And to be a little callous about it, it's much more efficient to
Oh,
have
yeah.
the written documentation because then there's no argument, there's no discussion. It's this is what this person wants, and this is what we will do. These are the steps.
Yeah, in especially too, I mean, it's just as important no matter what the situation. But I always tell people, especially when you have children, because
Yes.
you don't want that, and I call it a burden decision, whatever you want. You don't want to lay that on your children,
Right.
having them try to figure out what you wanted or didn't want, because
Mhm.
I know you have siblings, I have siblings. One sibling may be very strongly adamant about doing this for mom or dad. The other one might be completely opposite. Now you're causing at a very difficult time, you're adding really heavy conflict and,
Mhm.
a situation that could be easily avoided just by filling out
Right.
some easy documents that really 5 wishes is recognized, I think, in every state except for one without a notary. Um,
Mhm.
and I could be wrong on that stat. I know it's one or two. Um, and you just get notarized. But like in Michigan, I didn't have to notarize 5 wishes. I can just fill it
Mhm.
out, give a copy to my wife, to the doctor. Now we also have legal documents through our attorney and things, but
Yeah.
this is something, it's not about who's getting what. That's not what
Right.
5 wishes is. Are you familiar with 5 wishes?
I have not heard the term, no. So it
Oh,
would be great for the audience to know.
it's it is wonderful. So the man that started it, um, he actually was Mother Teresa's attorney. And yeah, I had him on the show, and I also had the president of 5 Wishes on the show, and
Mhm.
he um he saw firsthand what Mother Teresa did, and just was in awe, and it really changed his life. And
Mhm.
he started 5 Wishes, and he just you know really is adamant about people knowing what their loved ones' wishes are and what they
Mhm.
want and how they want to be treated. And he just has done tremendous work. He actually worked, his name is Jim Toohey. He's the founder of agingwithdignity.org, which is the parent, it's a nonprofit, but it's a parent, I guess, company or parent brand of 5 Wishes. Joanne Eason is the president of 5 Wishes. So it's 5wishes.org and agingwithdignity.org. And they're all about making sure people's wishes are respected and recognized. In this quick, and if I knew we were going to talk about that today, I would have grabbed one of the books, but it's like a manual. It's like a magazine, but like a 6, 7, 8 page magazine. So it's not like
Yeah.
a big magazine. You just fill it out. You tell, you know what, Katie, I've been thinking about life and I just want to be proactive. If something happens, would you mind being my advocate? So you put down, Katie Christophic, you would sign it, I would sign it. And then you go through in 5 wishes. There's 5 wishes and one wish per page for 5 pages. And
Mhm.
it's like, in the event I can't speak for myself, I would like to have my hair brushed and I'd like to have soft music playing. I
Mhm.
would like somebody to comfort me and, or
Yeah.
I don't want music playing,
Mhm.
it's all about you,
Right.
which is different than like having your will written out. Your will,
Mhm.
you designate your power of attorney, you list out, who's getting what, and then you have your
Mhm.
advance directives in the event my heart stops and they don't think I have a chance of meaningful recovery, please do not resuscitate me. Or
Yes.
if my heart stops and they feel like there's a meaningful chance, please do everything you can. But
Right.
if I need artificial ventilation, I only want it if they feel like there is a strong possibility I will come off of it. It's
Mhm.
very, very specific because in the
Right.
heat of the moment, I tell people the doctors the ambulance, the medical professionals, unless you have these wishes and what you want done, they're doing everything possible within their abilities to sustain your life. You might get resuscitated, being shocked 3 or 4 times.
Mhm.
You might then be placed on a ventilator, but is that what you want? And some
Right.
people will say yes, only if they then feel like I will have a chance to come off the ventilator and have a meaningful recovery. But if they don't feel like I'll have one, I don't want any of that because then
Right.
what am I at that point? It's a very
Mhm.
personal choice. I don't tell people what to do or how to pick. I just explain it so that they understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. And those are incredibly important resources to have. Uh, and it is worth not only doing it, but if you're not ready to do it, start thinking through it
Right.
and start talking with folks. You know, of course, something can happen at any time, but often you have lead time, right? So there can be situations like dementia where someone seems like they're okay. And by the time you realize they're not okay, they are not mentally able to fill out a form like that.
Right.
So it's a really good idea while everyone is healthy and of sound mind to get it in writing because, especially if you have multiple siblings or if um, the loved one doesn't have children, maybe they have nieces and nephews, or maybe they have their own sisters and brothers, whomever, they may tell one thing to somebody and they may say something to somebody else. And then if they can't speak for themselves, you have a problem.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I know, people sometimes it's very uncomfortable to even
Mhm.
approach that conversation. So
Yeah.
I tell people use a real world example or make up an example. Thanksgiving time, everybody's usually together, the holidays. Maybe that's not the time to have that conversation, but you could be maybe helping to make the salad or the stuffing and, oh, mom, did you hear about, Susie's mom, her heart stopped and they were able to bring her back. Man, what do you think about that? Like, you're kind of
Mhm.
getting mom's view without directly saying, Mom, what would you like to have done if you were Susie's mom? There's
Right.
ways you can do it without making it uncomfortable or make the person really, it's depressing to talk about our demise. It's going to happen to all of us, but it's trying to make it as comfortable as possible while, like you said, while you're still able to make those decisions. We tell families with the home care, you know, we don't go in there selling anything. Like I am the worst salesperson you will ever meet because like I will literally sell you on something else that's not us if I don't think you need us.
Yeah.
But what I mean by that though is when we meet with these families and sometimes it's, mom, oh, dad doesn't need any help. He is fine, but dad is definitely not fine, right? I mean, it's very
Yeah.
obvious. And mom is just a tiny thing and she's not able to help dad out of the chair or help him shout, things like that.
Hmm.
And, I just tell families, and it kind of applies to what we're talking about with the advanced directives, make the decision while you can still make it. Otherwise, it will get
Hmm.
made for you and there's nothing you'll be able to do about it.
Right.
Especially like you said, with somebody with dementia, it could come a point where it won't even be recognized. If you go to an attorney and the attorney, as an officer of the court, they have a legal obligation. If they don't feel like that person is making these choices with full competency and wherewithal, they won't do it,
Right.
and then you're kind of stuck, you know.
Yeah. So in that same vein, switching gears a tiny little bit, um, you are talking with caregivers and meeting with families all the time. What, I don't know if there's one thing, but what are the most common things you hear from them that are challenges um, in their day-to-day care and trying to figure out, how to help their person?
For me, I think it's kind of two things. One, they feel alone, they feel isolated, and they don't know how to get their social circle or even sometimes their siblings to buy in to
Mhm.
understand what's going on. That's really hard to break through because when you have a
Yeah.
person that, sometimes it's twofold with the siblings and friends, and this is really more for siblings. They'll say, "Oh, I called mom. She's fine." You know, and because it's a quick, hey mom, it's Lance, oh, it's good to hear from you. What's the weather like there? Oh, it looks sunny. But you're not getting into the meat and potatoes. You're only on the
Right.
appetizer. And that I've seen that play out so many times with families we've helped. And then, your social circle, they don't usually understand because most of them probably haven't gone through that yet with one of their
Mhm.
parents or even their spouse. And so that caregiver just feels like nobody understands them. They don't know who to turn to, and they just feel alone. And that loneliness ends up turning into depression. And then
Mhm.
that's just adding a snowball effect to what they're having to do for mom and dad.
Right.
The second issue is really being able to find somebody that they can talk to. And I
Mhm.
don't mean like in a therapeutic sense, but they can get answers. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you've probably heard me say this, a wonderful man, his name's Ian Kramer. And when we were talking, he said this term and I've used it a million times and now I hear other people using it. It's adios, or it's diagnose and adios. You
Yeah.
go to that doctor's office, okay, Mrs. Smith, I'm really sorry. We feel like your husband has got dementia. You know, all right, well, we'll see you back in a month. Yeah, I mean, okay,
Yes.
there's got to be more to that, right? No, I
Right.
mean, they're really getting that, and then it's we'll see you back next time.
You
And
are
so,
on your own.
right. And so that's really one of the other biggest issues is who can I talk to that can explain this to me? Who can I like they're just kind of blowing in the wind. That's what we
Right.
love about the Carefulness, right? You're trying to get that information in front of them. With All Home Care Matters, we're trying to get conversations in front of people that is addressing a lot of these issues. Like
Mhm.
there's help out there, but it's twofold. You have to find the people that need the help, but then the
Mhm.
people that need the help have to be able to find you because
Right.
they're not getting it in their local communities. You know,
Yeah.
we facilitate 5 caregiver support groups throughout southeastern Michigan, all in totally geographically different areas, different counties. But the same theme is we're here because we're not getting anything from the doctor. He's like, well, you can try this pill. And, because as great as doctors are, they're a lot of them are your traditional family doctor, your internist. They're
Mhm.
not really fully educated in the role of dementia. They can understand the disease, they can give you an
Mhm.
idea, but what do I do, doc, if, my husband gets up tonight and wants to walk around the house and go outside? How do I get him to
Yeah.
go back to bed? Or, I mean, all these different things. That's not what they're doing, So these
Right.
families are just left, that's like, Lori LeBay and all these great dementia people, that's why everyone is doing what they're doing in the space because it's resonating with people because they're getting it from you, they're getting it from us or Lori or whoever because they're not getting it from their doctor's office and they're not getting it in their community. So they have to turn online to get this information. And I just don't feel like that should be that way.
No, I agree. It shouldn't be that way. Um, I say this all the time. Like, I would love if the care list didn't have to exist.
Right. 100%.
In an ideal world, you wouldn't need me,
Yep.
but here we are.
Yep.
So, um, for those two challenges that you raise that you see the most often, do you have advice for those situations? Or you've mentioned Lori LeBay for dementia and resources there. Um, are there any other resources or anything else you would like to add to that?
Well, I mean, there's a lot. I mean,
Mhm.
there's resources are not lacking. The problem is it's the connecting the resources to the resourcee, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really where lies in the challenge is,
Mhm.
one, I tell people trust and find vetted resources. That's what we love about Carefulness, right? You're not putting anything up there that could be questionable or is not authentic or lacks integrity in the information or it's not fake news or however you want to phrase it.
Mhm.
But again, people have to find the Carefulness. A lot of times
Right.
when people are looking for something, what do? They just go to Google and they
Mhm.
type it in, and that's dangerous.
Yeah.
I'm not saying all results are bad, but there's going to be results that might not be on the up and up, so to speak, or they might have
Yep.
a slanted vested interest in how they're pitching or positioning the information you're reading.
Mm.
And so my advice is just do your homework, in the middle of all the caregiving. What's your stat, Katie? 14 hours,
Uh,
13, 12?
the average caregiver spends at least 13 hours every month on
Yeah.
research for their person.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so if you give them that 13 hours back, that could be an extra couple good nights sleep. It could be
Mhm.
extra time to exercise or make healthier food because you're not having to crunch through a drive-through or, you know, I mean, time I think is the most valuable asset out of all of
Yes.
this because it's so lacking because so much is, and I'm speaking firsthand. I know you're speaking firsthand for caring for your mom, myself with my father. I mean, there was no time really for anything. I mean,
Yeah.
when he moved in, it was literally 24/7,
Yeah.
and I don't know if I mean I would still been able to do it, but I don't know if I would have quote unquote came out of it as good as I did. And what I mean by that is like I'm in my early 20s, so I'm still able to eat healthy and I didn't have the responsibilities of a corporate job, children.
Mhm.
So it was really like I could devote that time. But the average caregiver, I just put something up the other day. I did a short video on it. It's phenomenal. It's like 80 something percent of people between the ages of 40 and 65 are
Mhm.
taking care of a loved one.
Yeah.
That's the age range when you are going to become a family caregiver, statistically speaking. At
Right.
that point, you usually have children or maybe if you're in the higher age range, maybe you're having some of your own health issues, and now you're adding this, I call it a stress because it is a stress.
Mhm.
You're adding this stress on top of you that could have very dire consequences. And
Yeah.
statistically speaking, I think you've said this or you know this, a family caregiver's health is usually going to suffer and have more consequential effects negatively on the caregiver than it ever does the person receiving the care,
Yes.
because I don't want to say they're content, but they're already where they're at. They're
Mhm.
not going to get more sick because you're their caregiver, or they're not going to
Right.
have any negative unless you neglect them or something.
Mhm.
They are who they are at that point. You are coming in hopefully healthy, and you can see it statistically, your health decline because you're putting
Mhm.
off, your aerobics class you'd go to, you're putting off your social outing with friends because, you got to do your caregiving. You're maybe avoiding getting your hair or nails done or whatever. Your me time is pretty much now devoted to them time, being the
Yes.
caregiver for that person. And eventually it does snowball and it does catch up on you.
Yeah, it does. Um, I was reading, and I will probably flub the statistic myself a little bit here, but the percentage of caregivers as you age, right? It goes up that the caregiver will actually pass before the person receiving care.
Yes.
And it's a high number. I think over the age of 70, it's like 70% of
Yeah.
caregivers will pass before their loved one. So, not to add additional stress to people, but it really is important that you take care of yourself, because once you become a caregiver, it gets that much harder to take care of yourself. And it shouldn't be that way. And we are trying our best to try and change things. But in the meantime, this is where we are. So eating well and going for a walk or doing simple stretching exercises, that kind of stuff is incredibly important wherever you can fit it in 5 minutes at a time.
Yeah. Well, and going back to home care too, even if you just hire a caregiver to come in once a week for 4 hours, or maybe twice a week for 4 hours each time, get that 8 hours a week. You need that time for yourself. People
Yes.
say, well, you know, I feel guilty and I feel like I'm abandoning them. No, you're enabling yourself so that you can continue caring for them and helping them.
Right.
If you go, like I tell fans, if you go down, who's going to be there to fill your place?
Right.
That's what it boils down to.
Yes.
And you got to have contingency plans. You got to have that respite time. I tell people if you can avoid hiring somebody privately because that could just end up being a lot worse situation than what a couple dollars an hour might save you. that person hurts himself taking care of your mom or dad or whoever the loved one is, you're responsible because you probably aren't paying for workman's comp on them. Taxes, you got to pay taxes on them. What if they, God forbid, steal some of your mom's precious, family heirloom jewelry? Do you have bonding insurance to get at least it won't replace the sentimental value, but the financial value of it? There's all these
Mhm.
things when you hire a private caregiver, or let's say you and your husband had this trip planned. You're going away for the weekend finally because you've been helping mom for the last 3 years nonstop. Your
Mhm.
husband got this trip, little getaway as a gift to you. You guys are packing your suitcases. They're at the door. You're just waiting for the caregiver to arrive. They don't show up.
Right.
That's the downside to hiring a private caregiver. I don't default people. I just like them to know the realities. With a company, you have all those protections. Companies have
Mhm.
backup staff. There is a lot to be said for that. And these people are going to be qualified and properly trained and experienced with what your loved one's dealing with.
Mhm.
A private caregiver may not, and
Right.
it's just to me, it's kind of driving your car without auto insurance. You may think I'll never get in an accident. I've never had a ticket, but that might be the day you do get in an accident. You need that insurance. That's why we all have it, right?
Right.
Um, so, just educate yourself, but you can also call your local area agencies on aging. They have wonderful resources.
Yes.
There's a lot of things you can do to find that time just for yourself. And, truthfully, as much as you and your loved one love each other, it might be a good needed break for the both of you too. Just a little
Mhm.
change of scenery because that
Yeah.
can wear on people. And, you don't want to hurt that relationship because you're
Right.
both kind of needing a break, but you don't really have an option. So you just kind of muddle through it and you want to salvage that relationship. And one last thing I'll say about that is, being a son or a daughter taking care of a parent, you step out of that family role of being a son or a daughter, and
Mhm.
it's always nice when you can go back into that role and not be in the caregiver role.
Right. Yes. So, yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about securing your own oxygen mask before helping the person next to
Yep,
you.
yep,
It's that
100%.
same sentiment that you've got to be able to be good on your own, who you are, before you can help your loved one. And with what you were just saying, that relationship dynamic shifts immediately once you go into that caregiver role. And it can be really awkward and it's mentally and emotionally exhausting for
Yeah,
both of you because it's a really big shift.
right.
And it is so nice when you have the time and the opportunity to go back into what your role has typically been and what their role has typically been because there is a certain amount of formality and almost like a business transaction in caregiving.
Right,
It's not that familial relationship anymore a lot of the time.
right.
And that can add to, the depression and the isolation and missing the person, even though they're right there in front of you.
Yeah. Well, and going back to that again on the roles, I tell
Mhm.
family, when they're siblings and they're local or they're long distance, and like with your situation, Katie, you can get buy-in from them and you have to get buy-in from them because that will also you might be the most easygoing person, but if you're helping mom or dad or whatever at 2 a.m. in the morning because they had an accident and you were sound asleep and you're the one there helping to get them situated, you're doing it out of love, of course. But if you
Right.
have no buy-in from your siblings, at some point that's going to cross through your memory and
Yep.
you're going to say, you know, I'm doing all this and, Katie's not doing nothing.
Hmm.
So my tips are, if it's a long distance caregiver, let's say Katie lives in another state or hours away or works or
Hmm.
whatever, they don't have to be there hands-on caregiving. They can be long distance caregiving by helping to set appointments, making sure
Yes.
mom's medications are refilled on time, doing all of those things to take that off of your plate. And then if
Hmm.
they are local, maybe it's a son and he's like, I cannot bathe and wash mom. Let him help get the groceries, pick up the prescriptions, get some sort of buy-in from everybody, but don't fight over it. If they're just dead set against it, it's not worth your energy and frustration to try to beat a dead horse, right?
Right.
If you can just lay out some things, but that's another thing where I tell families, don't wait till the crisis happens and you need the buy-in. Have a
Yes.
conversation as the siblings together and just say, hey, mom and dad are getting up there in age. I'm just starting to think, if one of them need help, we all need to kind of know and identify what our roles are, you know,
Yes.
because you shouldn't take it on by yourself if you have siblings.
Right. Agreed. And the other thing about, long distance caregiving and all of that, I mean, there is so much that you can do,
Oh,
and dividing all of the work amongst yourselves. But if there is a sibling or a niece or a nephew or, somebody else in the care network who says, I can't do this, I can't do that, have a conversation with them about maybe they would be willing to pay for someone to do their part.
yeah, 100%.
They may be willing to pay for somebody to come in for a half a day once a week
Yes.
and relieve you in that way. Um, so there are other ways that you can appeal to them if they're not a hands-on person for whatever reason. Yeah, I have a hard time with that personally, but leaving
Right.
that at the door, there are other ways to involve them and get them to support you.
Yeah. Or taking them to the appointments and taking notes and then sharing
Mhm.
that with the family.
Yes.
Or, you know, one for me is have mom come stay the weekend at their house once in a while,
Yes.
just to, change the scenery, give you a breather, give mom a breather. There's
Mhm.
a million and two ways where I feel like people, and I don't know if you agree with this, Katie, but I feel like when people say, I'm a caregiver for mom, they immediately go to, oh, you're helping her with bathing and it's all hands on. No,
Mhm.
being a caregiver, there's a lot of different hats you can wear, and
Yes.
all of them are as equally as important because you can't
Right.
do one without the other.
Right.
Mom can't get better if she doesn't have her prescriptions. She can't have her prescriptions if, somebody doesn't pick them up or take her to the doctor to get them refilled. There's a lot of ways that a lot of roles people can help fill and contribute so that they're helping whoever that hands-on primary caregiver is.
Yes. And if you think about caregiving, I've started thinking about it in this way to help put it into some context for folks. If you think about it like a business or
Yeah,
like a company where you work, you have your CFO, you have somebody who's handling the finances, you have your HR person, you have somebody who's handling the benefits and maybe making appointments and things like that. You have those different types of roles, and all of that needs to happen.
right.
You have your COO, your chief operating officer. So maybe that person is handling all of your gardening and landscape, like whatever that stuff is, stuff
Yeah,
with your car and things. So just a different way to think about it if you're having trouble figuring out where you fit in.
yeah, absolutely. That's a great way of looking at it.
Great. Well, thank you, Lance A. Slatton, for joining us today. If you haven't already, you should absolutely check out his podcast, All Home Care Matters, and the other family of podcasts under that umbrella. Thanks, Lance.
Thanks, Katie. Always good to see you.
Likewise.